Here's a joke that isn't really a joke. So let's just imagine for a minute that the VAT campaign gets what it's asking for. Just say the Treasury looks at the VAT precedents from Ireland, Finland, and the Netherlands, the ones we picked apart in the last episode, and says, fine, let's do a proper European comparison in this sector. Not just VAT, all of it. Minimum wage, employer national insurance, the whole cost of the employment picture, benchmarked against the exact countries the campaign keeps pointing to. Be careful what you wish for, because when you actually run those numbers, not a flat one-line comparison, but the real rate tables, the real thresholds, the real minimum wage specific carve-outs that almost every country turns out to have somewhere, you get two completely different answers depending on which half of the comparison you're looking at. Match the minimum wage and it turns out the UK isn't the one with the catching up to do. Match the employer contributions, and for most of the big name comparators, though not all of them, it's the other way around entirely. So last episode we went through the Ireland VAT precedent that the BHC's written evidence leans on, and the claim that Ireland lowered the VAT threshold and also lowered the VAT rate, resulting in a 32% growth. We showed that the threshold has only ever risen, and the 32% figure has no citation anywhere in almost 20 years of Irish data. We then went further afield. Finland's real hairdressing VAT cut in 2007 and the Netherlands cut in 2000. And we found in both those cases that prices didn't fall the way you'd expect, and employment didn't move the way the campaign story requires. So the look at Europe argument has taken some damage on VAT specifically. This episode asks a different question. If we're doing a proper look at a European comparison, not cherry picking one rate in one country, what does the rest of Europe cost? What does the rest of the European cost of employment picture look like? Because VAT is not the only lever. Wages and employer social contributions are the other two. So let's start with the headline framing you'll see repeated, that UK wage costs are racing ahead of a Europe that's somehow more competitive on this front. So, is that true? Eurostat published its first 2026 minimum wage comparison at the end of January 2026. Gross monthly in euros applicable from the 1st of January 2026. And here's where the countries the campaign likes to cite actually sit. France, €1,823 a month. Belgium, €2,112 a month. The Netherlands, €2,295 a month. Germany, €2,343 a month. Ireland, €2,391 a month. Luxembourg, top of the table, €2,704. Now, the UK, from April 2026, the national living wage for workers 21 and over went up to £12.71 an hour. Run that out over a standard 37.5 hour week and you're at roughly £2,065 a month. So let's flip that around, convert the euro figures into pounds at roughly 0.855 pence to the euro, which is today's working rate, and I'll flag it properly in the show notes that it's moved day to day. Luxembourg would be £2,312, Ireland would be £2,044, Germany £2,003, the Netherlands £1,962, Belgium £1,806, and France £1,559. So now let's put the UK's £2,065 a month next to that list. That's not roughly level with Germany, it's above both Ireland and Germany, second from the top of the entire table, behind only Luxembourg, and comfortably clear of the Netherlands, Belgium and France below it. So this isn't a country falling behind a more generous continent. And minimum wage specifically, the UK isn't near the top of the European range. On this conversion, it's in second place outright. So I want to be precise about the uncertainty here because that matters more to me than making the strongest possible point. The exact gap to Ireland and Germany moves around with the exchange rate. Excuse me. And I've seen quotes ranging from 85 to 87 pence per euro on any given day. What doesn't move, though, is the shape of the picture. Across that whole range, the UK stays ahead of Ireland and Germany, not behind them. Second place isn't a rate-sensitive claim here, it holds up. So if the government matched Europe on minimum wage specifically, the honest prediction is not much changes for the UK because basically we're already there. That's not where the real story is. The real story is what happens if you match the other half of the cost of employment picture, what the employer actually pays on top of the wage. And here's the number that actually moves. Employer national insurance in the UK sits at flat 15% whenever an employee earns above £5,000 a year. That threshold is so low it barely functions as a minimum wage relief at all. A full-time minimum wage stylist employer is paying close to 15% on almost that whole wage. Now let's line that up against what employers actually pay elsewhere in Europe, and this is where matching Europe stops being one simple story and splits into two. In Germany, employer social contributions run to roughly 20 to 21% of gross pay. The Netherlands is somewhere in the low to mid-20s, Belgium's around 25 to 27%. All of these are meaningfully higher than the UK's 15%. If the government matched any of those, employer costs would go up, not down. Then there's France, which is the scariest headline in the lot, 42 to 45%. And I want to slow down here because I already went and checked this properly for a previous piece of work on this exact comparison, and it's the single most important caveat in this whole episode. That 42 to 45% figure is real, but it isn't what applies at minimum wage. France runs a targeted reduction in employer contributions. It's been rebuilt from the ground up as of 1st January 2026 and renamed the RGDU, forgive me, it's a while since I was at school doing French, Reduction Générale Dégressive Unique, replacing what used to be informally called the Filon reduction. The relief is at its maximum exactly the minimum wage, the SMIC currently €1,867 a month gross, and only fully disappears once you're paying someone 3 times that, around €5,600 a month. At the minimum wage itself, French employer contributions after the reduction come out to roughly 10 to 15% of gross pay. So that's 10 to 15%, which is in the same ballpark as the UK's flat 15%, not dramatically above it. So France, despite having the scariest single number on the table, turns out not to be the country that would raise UK employer costs if matched, because nobody employing someone at the minimum wage in France is anywhere near that number. Excuse me. Excuse me again. And here's the second twist, smaller but worth having, because it shows this isn't a French quirk. Ireland, the campaign's own favourite country for the VAT precedent, has a standard PRSI rate of 11.25%, lower than UK's 15% outright, but it also runs a reduced employer rate, currently around 9%, for anyone earning up to €552 a week. Work out what Ireland's own minimum wage comes to on a weekly basis, and it lands right at that boundary, close enough to be that a full-time minimum wage worker in Ireland may actually qualify for the lower band, not the standard one. And I want to flag that precisely rather than round it into a firm claim. It's close enough to the threshold that it depends on exact hours and pay period timing, and I haven't nailed down a single authoritative worked example. But even the standard 11.25% is already below what the UK charges, so Ireland used consistently as the VAT good news story would, if matched an employer NI, actually cut UK employer costs, not raise them. One thing that needs saying properly rather than glossed over, because getting this wrong would be exactly the kind of headline without context mistake this series exists to catch. Romania sits at the very bottom of the table. Its employer contribution rate is genuinely tiny, 2.25%. But that's not because Romanian labour is cheap to employ overall. It's because Romania puts almost the entire social contributions burden on the employee side instead. 35% comes straight out of the worker's pay, split between pension and health insurance. A bare employer rate comparison makes Romania look like the cheapest country in Europe to hire someone, but the honest picture is that Romania has just moved the same cost to a different column, not made it smaller. I haven't done the equivalent full employer plus employee comparison for every country in this table, so I'm not claiming that Romania is the only place where that shift happens. I'm just flagging that the employer-only figure on its own can mislead in exactly this way. So, match Germany, the Netherlands or Belgium in employer contributions and UK employer costs rise. Match France properly at minimum wage, not the headline number, costs barely move. Match Ireland and the costs would actually fall. Matching Europe on employer NI isn't one answer. It depends entirely on which European country you mean, and whether you're reading headline rate or the rate that actually applies to someone on minimum wage. So, none of what I've walked through means that the underlying pressure in this industry isn't real, and I've never said that there aren't issues in the industry. Wage costs have risen faster than prices Salons charge. That's the wage price gap from episode 1. And nothing in this episode changes that arithmetic. A salon owner watching their biggest fixed costs climb every April while customers push back on price rises is dealing with something genuinely difficult. And I'm not here to tell you otherwise. I've been that owner. What this episode means is narrower than that, and it cuts both ways rather than one convenient direction. On minimum wage, the UK is genuinely near the top of the European range, not catching up to it. On employer contributions matching some of the biggest European economies, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, really would raise UK costs. That part isn't a myth. What doesn't hold up is the specific, tidiest version of the Europe does this better story. The one that reaches for France's scariest number without checking what applies at minimum wage, or that treats Europe as a single answer when Ireland alone would cut costs if matched. That's a claim about evidence quality in both directions. It's not a claim that salon owners are wrong to feel squeezed, and it isn't a claim that every European comparison favours the UK either. So let's have a quick look back. Episode 1 established the real pressure, national living wage up 119% against hairdressing prices rising 69% over the same period. This episode doesn't touch that number. If anything, today's figures keep the gap widening. We've looked at VAT, precedents, Ireland's threshold and rate claims, and the actual Finland and Netherlands evidence and pass-through and employment effects. This episode is the wages and contributions companion piece to those. Same pattern, different lever, specific evidence cited in support of a look at Europe keeps not matching what Europe's own data shows once you go and check it. So, minimum wage we checked, the UK is near the top of the European table, not somewhere near the bottom playing catch up. Employer contributions we checked, it's genuinely mixed. Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium would really cost the UK more employers more if matched, France's terrifying headline number turns out not to apply anywhere near the minimum wage. And Ireland, the campaign's own preferred VAT precedent, would actually cost us less. Matching Europe isn't a single answer. It depends on which country and which number you're reading off the page. And I know how this is starting to sound episode after episode, and I want to be careful about that. This isn't me building a case that the sector's problems are made up or that everyone making this argument is acting in bad faith. It's a pattern in the evidence quality specifically. Claims that don't survive contact with the primary source over and over across VAT, wages, tribunal citations, apprenticeship figures. I can't show you a document where anyone admits to picking the numbers that flatter the argument. What I can show you is that it keeps happening, and I think that's worth these episodes to lay out properly. Every source for this episode will be in the show notes if you want to go and check them yourself. Thanks for listening, and I shall see you on the next one. Thank you.